And to discuss the situation in Chile 2 years after the major civil unrest of 2019, we now welcome political analyst Kayla Popuchet. Kayla, thank you so much for joining us again today.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here to speak about the plights of the Chilean people, ongoing for decades now.
Kayla, it's 2 years since the 2019 outburst of major protests in Chile, which were met with widespread state repression. Chileans are still calling for justice today. What can you tell us about the human rights abuses perpetrated under the Sebastián Piñera administration?
The Chilean people had to endure and continue to suffer through the decades-long influence of the dictatorship, which was imposed in 1973. And this had only been continued through the neoliberal government of Sebastián Piñera. But what we saw in 2019, the eruption of the Chilean fervor, first initiated by the heightened prices of the trains and then gas issues, erupting all these social unrest rooted in economic and political repression, we have seen this continue. And COVID had, while it slowed down a little bit during COVID, it did not put a complete stop to it. While there was still the toque de queda, people had to stay at home, people still shared information around online, created these organizations and online circles to resist. And last week, we have seen people go out and protest, as you said earlier today. Today, Monday on the 18th, has been continued protests following the investigation that Sebastián Piñera was mentioned in the Piñera papers, infamous for embezzlement and fraud among the world elites, political leaders, financial leaders, and so forth. And Piñera was no exception to that, along with the fact that his administration has ordered injuries, thousands upon thousands of injuries of Chilean protesters, many going missing, people being murdered, losing their arms, their legs, their eyes. In fact, last week there was an indigenous human rights lawyer who was murdered at these protests, and the police have not let up while the people continue to resist and protest. The same exact repression that they're complaining about, Piñera continues to order it and order it again. And despite being proven to be an embezzler, a fraud, a liar, and honestly a dictator, the fact that he will still point his fingers at others. And we also want to mention that the type of political environment that Piñera has also allowed to continue in Chile, resulting in, earlier from the 1973 dictatorship, which was able to ferment, but even to this day, I want to recall upon that his administration has been one that is extremely hostile to not only leftists in his own country and indigenous and campesinos in his own country, but also the leftist countries surrounding him. Bolivia, he supported the coup in Bolivia, he supported the attempted coup in Venezuela. And that political environment that he's been allowed to foster along with the right wing has also been responsible for the far right in Chile had set fire to the homes of Venezuelan migrants that were living in Iquique. And this is the political environment that Piñera has allowed to flourish, has fostered, and continues to maintain in Chile. But it will not last for long. He is being investigated. There is impeachment investigation happening in the start of next month, in just a couple of weeks, that are looking ahead of the elections. And the Chilean people have had enough. And despite how many times that he tries to set them down, push them back, kill them, hurt them, beat them, they refuse to stay at home. They refuse to allow their country to be continued to ruled by a neoliberal dictator.
Kayla, you've been speaking there about all the abuses under the Piñera government. We've also seen the recent revelations involving President Piñera in the Pandora's Papers investigation, the calls for his impeachment, which have been long going ever since these human rights abuses that we've seen over the past 2 or more years. What do you think is the shift in terms of the political landscape? Do you think the upcoming elections could see a major shift?
Well, we do see that the center-left leader, Boric, have been leading the polls and has been consistently leading the polls over the center-right wing. And I think that absolutely the people have had enough of Piñera, but he also is just another manifestation, and this has been along in Chilean conversation circles since 2019, that he's just a manifestation of what is an integral problem in the Chilean constitution and the Chilean institutions, which is that the center right, the neoliberal imperialist right, continues to have power and continues to flourish. And that's why they're starting to look and starting to take more attention to the left in Chile, whether it be the center left to the Marxists, the socialists, has been able to increase and has been able to capture the rage of the Chilean people that have been betrayed and that have been beaten and have been ignored by embezzlers, by the capitalists that have been selling their country out to imperialists while also beating them at the same time and murdering their native people and pushing them further and further away. And so absolutely, seeing that he's been in the Pandora Papers was no surprise to the Chilean people, but it is just a lingering frustration that while he continues to point the fingers at all these other leftist countries, and he continues to point the fingers in political repression among the people in his own country, that he continues to use the Chilean economy, the Chilean people, as a joke to embezzle and to sell out what was it, the mining concessions to a friend and then claim he didn't know about it is an absolute joke. But the Chilean people they're not going to let this stand by. They're not going to let this president and no longer this political tendency to continue to use them. And it's just reflective in the upcoming election polls.
Kayla, you referred there to the Constitution, and there is the process to redraft the Chilean Constitution, which we could say came out of these as one positive result of the major protests that we saw 2 years ago, was the fact that there became a widespread movement that led to enough pressure to form this commission to redraft the Chilean Constitution. How likely is that to result in a constitution that can really lead to change in Chile?
Well, along with the constitutional change and the constitutional convention that came out of these protests, but there was also conversations about the Mapuche and the indigenous people's rights and women's rights. And we're seeing that also being reflected in the constitutional convention that they have now. For example, the president of it is a indigenous woman, Elisa Loncon, who was also a victim of the Mapuche people, and also were victims of this neoliberal dictatorship that started with Pinochet, which is a constitution that has continued to exist as a result of Pinochet's illegal dictatorship. And so we're seeing that Chile is going into a shift, and not to say that they're going back to where they were, because again, this is not 1970s. They're not going back to Allende, but they're taking their history and taking a hard look at where their history has brought them now into seeing the changes in the future. And exactly as we're talking about the protests that have been kicked off today, many of these are being called by the campesinos. Protests for last week were being called by indigenous leaders and indigenous campesinos, and now there's actually a state of emergency in Chile because they are fighting the government who continues to repress them. And so this constitutional convention finally has the real chance to take a hard look at Chile, its history, where it's been, and to change that where it's going forward. And we see from the people, the representatives that are in there, from the polls that are looking at the upcoming elections, from the protests that are going to be kicking off, until Piñera is gone and until a new constitution is made, because it's been 2 years and they're not ending anytime soon, that we're seeing that Chile is taking the first steps to a better future, one that is feminist, one that is inclusive and plurinational of all the people of Chile, including the indigenous people, including the Afro people, all Chileans and all people that live on this land, and all the working class people, to build that better future and to build that road. Now, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to happen overnight. They've been protesting for 2 years and they're still protesting, but they've got that fervor and they're going to keep going on. And Piñera and the neoliberal right wing, well, their days are numbered.
Kayla Popuchet is a political analyst specialising in Latin American affairs. Thank you so much for joining us again today and offering your insight into the mobilizations and the future of Chile. Thank you.